Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a different video because I have just read Terry Pratchett's The Color of Magic, and I want to talk about it. So, this is the first Discworld novel in the series. The series is, I guess, depending on how you count, it's either 35 or 41 books, but 6 of those are like YA novels that take place in the Discworld but aren't necessarily connected to any of the other subseries because there are multiple subseries. And it's also the first Discworld novel that I've read. I wasn't told to start with the first one. Actually, like, people consistently kept telling me I shouldn't start with the first one. Basically, they recommended to me either Weird Sisters, which is the sixth book in the Discworld series, or Small Gods, which is the 13th book. But I just couldn't bring myself to start with any other book than the first one. I have read one other book by Sir Terry Pratchett, which is Good Omens. It was co-authored, but still, first Terry Pratchett book that I've read. And I really liked the writing in Good Omens. So I was looking forward to reading the Discworld series. I have actually been wanting to get into the Discworld series since 2019, and I was kind of like put off by the sheer length. 41 or even just 35 books is a big commitment. And then I went ahead and bought the first 13 books like in one big bulk purchase. So here we are. So, what is entering this world like as a first time reader? I'm gonna have to be honest with you, it's a lot. This doesn't feel like the first book in the series. It kind of immediately hits you over the head with lore and how the Discworld works. It just, in case people don't know, like the Discworld is kind of like this universe that the whole series is set in. And basically, what it's like is there's a great world turtle called Great Atuan. On top of the turtle are four elephants, which carry a disc that spins, and there's like an edge that gets brought up a lot, actually. The characters live on this disc, which is why it's called Discworld. I think I will probably put up a picture of what it looks like because there have been, artistic renditions of it. So yeah, basically, like right from the start, like the prologue of the first book explains a lot of how the Discworld works in just one fell swoop. I kind of got the impression that Sir Terry Pratchett must have lived with this world for a really long time before he started writing these books because it felt immediately so lived in and so like it's there's so much that has already happened that the reader just isn't privy to. It really feels like this world has been around for such a long time already, and you're just kind of like dropped in and you have to figure your own way out or through. Like, you don't really want to get out of this world, at least I didn't, but like you have to like kind of make your own way through. So there's like tons of lore from page one, and yeah, you kind of like get this feeling of like you must catch up. But I actually found, like, once I got into it, I actually didn't find it all that hard to catch up with what was going on. And this is like kind of like I think this is a little bit due to the fact that the first book, it has four chapters, and two of which have a prologue, the other two do not. And they are almost episodic. Like each chapter tells a chunk of the adventure, and they're only like pretty much very loosely connected. So you kind of like each chapter kind of like drops you at a point. You have to figure out where you are, where you're going, and but it is kind a little. It feels like almost self-contained. Obviously, there's like an overarching story going on, but so that's basically the gist of it. And all of these chapters kind of felt, especially at the start of each chapter, I felt like this was kind of like those were like disparate pieces that slowly came together in order to tell like a story. But again, it's very good storytelling, which brings me to like the second thing that I really want to talk about. And that is like, how does Terry Pratchett tell stories? And the short answer is very, very, very well. Like, I don't think I can overstate how much I liked his writing. And like the things that particularly stood out to me, like as a very dry humor, feels very British in the best sense. So the story is told kind of like in an omniscient narrator type of voice, but we do follow like Rincewind and Two Flower as, I would probably say, like the main protagonists. But omniscient narrator, kind of all knowing, looks at the story from above. The other thing that I noticed, and by the way, I keep looking down because I have like notes that I made while reading. So I sat down, read the story, and I very regularly stopped and took notes. And this is kind of like what I'm reading from here. So the other big thing that I noticed is that Pratchett really trusts his readers. So like he doesn't spell everything out. Like there's no big authorial explanation, or at least like sometimes there are because you maybe needed to follow the story, but it never feels like it. Like I said, he doesn't give too much away. He doesn't spell everything out, but he just like drops enough hints so that you can follow the story along. You can try and make guesses. I never got it right, by the way. I normally would find that annoying that I couldn't figure out where the story is going. Like I would normally would think like, oh, like it's gonna be some random twist that wasn't even set up, or that is just a plot twist for a plot twist's sake. So I was getting a little nervous, but no, it's weird. It's honestly the best way I can describe it is batshit insane, but there's an internal logic to it. So it's not that the twists come out of nowhere. They have been set up largely. 99% of the time they have been set up. It's just that they go somewhere so weird and otherworldly that I just couldn't figure it out. And I don't know, maybe like I think this is like an experience that new time readers will share. Also, like I still had no idea where we were going 30 pages from the end. Absolutely no idea. Just the other thing I noticed is that sometimes his descriptions sounded a little bit self-aggrandizing. So I wrote down the actual line from I think it's the second prologue that made me think this. The Discworld offers sights far more impressive than those found in universes built by creators with less imagination, but more mechanical aptitude. Like I kept thinking, I know there's like the sense that there was a creator of Discworld in the sense that there is a god in this universe. But I kept like thinking, Pratchett is the creator of Discworld. And this made this feel kind of like a little bit self-aggrandizing. Like you are the creator of Discworld and you're saying that you have more imagination than pretty much everyone else, which I'm not necessarily denying. That's the other thing I will say about Pratchett's writing. He is so gosh darn creative. Like I literally made a note that reads, I find Pratchett so gosh darn creative. That is, and like I said, I don't think I can overstate that. But that kind of like that line kind of gave me like, are you being a little self-aggrandizing here? I think you might be. But then it almost immediately turns, or very quickly turns into self-deprecation. So the book talks about the Discworld gods and their jealousy of other gods who created universes with more mechanical aptitude. So like, oh yeah, I'm good, but I'm not that good, kind of like. So by the end of it, it felt more tongue in cheek than actually self-aggrandizing, which I very much appreciated. Like I was getting a little worried there for a second, and then it turns out, oh no, it's fine. It's fine. He's not self-aggrandizing. He's just tongue in cheek. He's very British. Also, I will say Terry Pratchett, like I kind of touched on this already, but he has a very unique writing voice. Like I think you can pick up a book and nobody told you who the writer, who the author is. and but you've read a work by Terry Pratchett before, and you will pick up the book and you will go like, oh yeah, that's written by Terry Pratchett. He has such a unique voice, such a unique writing style. Like I said, it does make it resemble Good Omens, or I think it's more like, I guess it's more accurate to say that Good Omens resembles the Discworld series because the first Discworld novels got published before Good Omens. The other very big thing that I noticed in terms of Terry Pratchett's writing style is his language is very easy to follow. Like I could very much like keep up with like what was happening in the story and what was going on, but the concepts are wildly abstract. And like I frequently found myself like kind of like in imagination overload. Like he was describing so like things that were so out of this world, which makes sense because it's not taking place in our world, but it was so out of this world that I was kind of like struggling to keep up with the images in my brain. And at times it even felt like my brain was kind of like saying, nope, you're on your own with this one. Nope, I'm not providing you an image with that for that because it's just it's too abstract. It's too wild a concept. But once you're in the story, like I said, it's very easy to follow along because yeah, like Terry Pratchett, like the language is very accessible, even though he sometimes uses terms that I haven't heard of, which might both be because the book was written in the 80s and language was a little bit different then, and also because English isn't my native language. So it might just be that I've just never heard of these terms. I know there are some adaptations of Discworld novels. I don't think there are very many, and what I've mostly heard about them is that they're not very good. And then fans have kind of complained about them a lot. And I can see why. Like, I can see why there are no good adaptations for any of the Discworld novels. Like I said, I sometimes struggled to come up with a mental picture. And I think even when I came up with a mental picture, it's so unique to how I read the story, to how I imagine these things. So my mental image is going to be so different from somebody else's mental image. How are you going to put that in a movie, which is a visual medium where you have to decide on what things look like? I don't think it can be done. I think these books need to stay books. Don't ever attempt to adapt them into a visual medium. Don't ever attempt to make a movie out of this. Don't ever attempt to make a series out of this. Even with like CGI and like not practical effects, but like CGI and like animation getting better, I don't think you will ever be able to accurately portray this book in a movie or a TV show that will make fans happy. Just let them stay books. If you want to enjoy the story, read them as books. And if you don't want to read them, get the audiobook because I did. I read this and I was simultaneously listening to the audiobook. And honestly, I highly recommend the audiobook. I think I'm going to start talking about that in a minute. So back burner for now, and we'll come back to it. I do have some other notes here, but I think I'm gonna just skip it because I'm already recording for 17 minutes, and I only have 2 points out of 5 that I want to talk about. So I'm gonna move this along. So I already mentioned that we follow that I would say the main protagonists are Rincewind and Two Flower, and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more detail now. So Rincewind calls himself a failed wizard, or pretty much the worst wizard in the world, and he's certainly not very good at it. I immediately thought that he was a very interesting choice for sort of like a protagonist main character. Like I said, he's not the narrator of the story, but it's certainly the character we follow along most. He seems very selfish and more than just a little duplicitous. Two Flower, I'm going to give a little bit of context first here. Two Flower is basically the world's first tourist. Discworld has never seen a tourist. He just arrives there and is kind of like, I want to see what this world has to offer. And not because he wants to live in that big, just because he wants to experience this. He's the archetypal tourist. But Discworld has never seen one before. And he basically arrives and immediately everyone wants to take advantage of him. Everyone senses that he's got money and kind of like doesn't understand how this world works. And Rincewind kind of wants to take advantage of him too. Not necessarily for the money, but like he senses that there's an opportunity and he's very much an opportunist. Yeah, he kind of seems like a morally dubious character. And I thought that was very interesting as a choice to like, this is the character whose eyes we experience the story through. But like I said, everyone wants to take advantage of Two Flower at the beginning. So he still seems like the best in a bad bunch. And yeah, but like still, like Rincewind tries to abandon Two Flower twice in the first 90 pages. And you, even to the very end, you still get the impression that he doesn't particularly like Two Flower. So yeah, again, like a very interesting choice. He's also a very reluctant protagonist. It always seems like he's kind of like dragged along by the plot, and he doesn't really want to be part of it, which makes this very entertaining to read. And also, he's like very unlucky, like in the second prologue. And I'm gonna give a bit of a spoiler warning here because mostly what I talked about up until now is the first 90 pages. I don't consider that very spoilery. Like basically, the first 90 pages kind of like loop around again. Like you start with the city of Ankh-Morpork on fire, and then and then you basically get a little bit of a flashback story of how we got here. So you dropped in middle of the action, then get a little bit of backstory to everything. So everything that I've talked about now, I don't consider very spoilery because there's literally like the first few pages of the book. The book is not very big, not very thick, by the way. It's just like 287 pages. So you can get through it in like I want to say an afternoon. But in the second prologue, it's revealed that the story is partially part of a game of the gods, specifically a board game, which I thought was very funny. Gods pass the time playing board games. I mean, what else are they going to do? Where the lady, who is one of the gods, plays Rincewind and kind of wants him to win, but you get the sense that like other gods are playing against him. So you get the sense that he's like a very unlucky character and that like not all that happens to him is his fault, which does endear him to the reader. And again, spoiler alert, by the end of the story, Rincewind had really, really grown on me. Like I really liked his humor, which is very much in line with like the humor of the story in general. But like I really liked his humor. I could understand him because Two Flower is kind of like played as this naive but lovable character. Like he doesn't really grasp the danger that they're in. He has this very strong belief that everything is going to work out for him because he's a tourist and he's just going to see the sights essentially. But they do get into very dangerous situations, potentially deadly situations. Again, spoiler alert, they don't die. I say that, but hang on. But like, so Rincewind was getting frequently very annoyed with Two Flower because he didn't grasp the danger that they're in. And I find myself like kind of empathizing with Rincewind. Yeah. So by the end, he had really grown on me, but Two Flower had grown on me too. And Two Flower has luggage. It is continuously referred to as the luggage with luggage capitalized, and it is its own character. It has a personality. It's just a chest with a million tiny little legs that follows Two Flower everywhere because it's made from sentient pearwood, which gives it intelligence and kind of like a bonding with its owner. Um, and so they kind of like frequently get separated from the luggage, or the luggage gets separated from Two Flower. Sometimes it's with Rincewind, but sometimes it's just completely off on its own. And you kind of like pan over to this part of the story, and then something happens with the luggage, and it's always so hilarious. Like it was kind of like a running gag throughout the book, and it made me chuckle every time. Made me chuckle. Also, Death is a character in generally the Discworld in and of itself. Like Death is how you imagine it, like skeletal, wears a dark robe, has a scythe. And I knew that this was going to be the case, but in the audiobook that I listened to, he was voiced by Bill Nighy, and that was such an excellent choice God, I love that so much. Like the first time Death speaks, and that was the first time Bill Nye's voice appeared, like chills down my spine. Like I had to pause the audiobook and go like, whoa, whoa. And then like it's so great. Which, like I said, can't recommend the audiobook enough to like really a good way into the story. Solid narrator and Bill Nye's death. No notes. Keep going. You're doing good. Okay. So I've talked about how like everything is a little bit weird. Everything seems a little bit wild and abstract and chaotic and just yeah, honestly, the best way is weird or like I said, batshit insane. But there's a weird kind of logic to Discworld. So let's talk about the world building. So, Color of Magic is the title. There is magic in this world, but I thought that was just like a really interesting way that the rules of magic were set up. For example, it's explained that once you use a spell, it's gone. So like you learn it, you memorize it, you learn whatever words you need to say, whatever motions you need to make, and then once you use it, it's basically gone, and you no longer have the knowledge for this spell, which I thought was really interesting because it makes it so constrained in a way. It gives it such a like, oh, so you wouldn't use spells willy nilly to for more convenience because then it's gone. And also, like, Rincewind is a failed wizard. He doesn't just call himself that. He did get expelled from the Unseen University, which is the kind of like academy of magic in this world, and but he only knows one spell, and he didn't even learn it on purpose. He learned it because he got dared to open like a very powerful magical book, and then this like the spell kind of leapt from the page into his mind, and now he knows it, but he doesn't even know what it's do. Nobody knows what it does, and that's what gets him expelled from the university. And they also talk a little bit about like a law of conservation of reality, which is basically the rule that the effort needed to achieve the goal needs to be the same regardless of the means that you use to get there. So whether you walk 10 miles or you teleport yourself 10 miles, you need the same effort to the action. Again, like it gives such like a constraint to magic. Like we always think of magic as like, oh, it's so cool and you can do so many things. And this is kind of like a very neat way around it to like not make magic people or people who can do magic all powerful, because they're not. They're still limited. And I just love the way that this is integrated into the story, the way that we learn about this, and just the rules in general. I find them so neat. Also, like the number 8 keeps cropping up. Like 8 is a magical number in Discworld, and the color of magic. It's not just the book title. Magic as a color. It is referred to as the 8th color, and is called Octarine. Octarine. I think it's Octarine. And there are different types of magic. Like they talk about old magic and tame magic. And tame magic is kind of like the magic that is practiced or that is learned at Unseen University. And then old magic sounds very much like so kind of like natural magic, like the magic of nature. Also, the gods of Discworld are very interesting to me. Like, first of all, that there are gods and that they kind of like take part in the story. I also found that really neat. But then, like, also that they're kind of like playing games and that it's a board game. I mean, come on, that's kind of funny. But they reminded me a little bit of Greek gods in a sense. Like on like pretty late into the book, they Rincewind describes the god as the rest of the gods were usually only sort of large scale humans fond of wine and war and whoring, which yeah, that sounds almost like the Greek idea of gods. Like in Greek, also the idea is that gods are like humans and not humans are like gods. So everything that they do is kind of like of a grander scale. Like they're tall, overscaled humans. They have the same flaws as humans, but just like kind of like dialed up to 11. And that sentence really reminded me of that and kind of made me think like, oh, are the Discworld gods kind of like a little bit like Greek gods? Obviously, I expect if we get more from the gods, I expect Terry Pratchett to put his own spin on it. But also, there's this reoccurring joke in the book that is kind of like economics is like magic, which I thought was very hilarious. So, a little bit of background to that too. Two Flower is from the counterweight continent, which I have already forgotten how they described it. I think it's basically like so that the disc won't fall off, so you have kind of like the counterweight continent. And in the counterweight continent, they don't have magic, but they have it is consistently referred to as reflected sound as of underground spirits. It's kind of like the roundabout explanation for that, and then it later turns out that it's just economics again. So like I find that so hilarious. And like at first I thought this would make the counterweight continent a little closer to our world because we also don't have magic but we do have economics. But the more we kind of like learn and about Two Flower and kind of like the technology that he has, like for example he has a camera. I don't think it's referred to as a camera, but he it's something like it takes pictures and he presses a button and then it takes pictures. So it operates like a camera, but then it turns out there is a little demon inside it. And I'm not just calling it a demon, they actually refer to it in the book as a demon. But there's a little demon inside it that just kind of like paints the pictures. And at one point he comes out and is basically like, I can't paint humans anymore. I don't have the color for it. Which made it sound like a printer. And so hilarious. But also like it is a camera, but it doesn't function like a camera in our world. So I don't think the counterweight continent is like our world. But I don't know. Oh, and there was, and again, this is kind of like a little bit spoilery. Although I don't think you can make sense of it if you haven't read the book, and if you have read the book, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But there is a moment where Rincewind and Two Flower need to get out of a situation. They need to escape pretty much certain death. And for some reason, they get into an alternate universe and are on an airplane or at an airport. And they're suddenly kind of like two different characters on a way to a physics conference or something. And Rincewind just gets handed a bomb. And like I wrote down like, huh? What the frick is going on? And then like once this kind of like winds to a close and Rincewind and Two Flower are back in the Discworld universe, there is like this weirdly logical explanation. And it's funny. It's very funny, like especially because it's written in such a deadpan way. But I could no, I can't explain it to you. And I don't think I meant to. Like I don't think that was the intention behind it. I think it was just meant to, oh yeah, they got out of the situation, everybody is okay. There are pretty much no to very minimal consequences to this. So like it's fine. It's fine if you don't get it. And that's kind of like the thing. I feel like a lot of this first book was it's fine if you don't get it, but you can still enjoy the story. And that's something I haven't really encountered in a book before. So yeah, Discworld logic works, even if I don't understand it. And like I said, I'm not entirely sure I'm meant to understand it, but it's fun. It's a fun ride. I had fun. Yeah, so how did the story actually work? How did the journey actually work? What was what were my impressions by the time I got to the end of it? So I already mentioned the episodic storytelling. So each chapter is kind of like an episode of its own, and they're loosely connected, but not hugely dependent on each other. And this reminded me a lot of Voyage of the Dawn Treader of the Chronicles of Narnia. Because there too, you have like every couple of chapters, they go to a different location, they experience different things, and it's like largely episodic and just loosely interconnected by the fact that they're traveling to all these places on the ship. And this is kind of like the same. Like Rincewind and Two Flower are kind of like journeying across the Discworld, and various things happen to them, but they're largely disconnected from each other. Also, at the end, like in the last chapter, it turns out that there were a few adventures that were skipped, which I thought was an interesting choice. Because in this last chapter, it's revealed that Rincewind and Two Flowers' journey takes about 6 months. And I think at the beginning, we get told every single step, but then there's like a bunch of stuff that happens in the middle, and we're just kind of like not privy to that. Because there was definitely an episode with like a pirate slash slave ship that we don't ever hear about, but like there like we certainly hear of the aftermath of that event. And that's like in this like kind of like slave ship is referenced every now and again. Like you kind of like pop over there, they have some trouble with the luggage, and the slave ship captain kind of at one point decides like, nope, nope, I'm done with this. And it's again, it's like very funny, and you don't need to know the specifics of it in order to find it funny. But I thought it was just like a very interesting choice to kind of like have this skipped adventure in the middle of it, when that was not the impression I was given at first. Like at first, everything seemed like to follow their journey very closely. But like again, it works. It works. You don't need to know the details. It's just a fun story. I feel like this would be my quote on the back of the book. It's funny. I don't know how it works, but it's funny. Good story. But I will say that the last chapter dragged a little more than the others. I can't actually explain why I felt that because it's not longer than the other ones. Definitely length of the audiobook chapter, it was the third chapter that was the longest. And then the last chapter was kind of like the same length as the first two. So I don't know why it felt longer, but it just I felt like it dragged a little bit more. It felt like we needed a lot more time to get to the point. But yeah, didn't ruin the book for me at all. Like I said, still a fun story. The ending was very unexpected. Like I mentioned earlier, 30 pages before the end, I had absolutely no clue where we were going and what the story would turn out to be. Turns out at the end, Rincewind just falls off the edge of Discworld. And I was like, I was not expecting that. By the way, don't come at me if you ignored my spoiler warning and I just spoiled the ending for you. I did tell you I was going to get into spoilers. So yeah, that's just kind of like the end of the book. And I gotta say, it made me very curious for the sequel. The second book, The Light Fantastic, is a direct sequel to that one. It's like the second book in the Wizard series. Wizards. As of recording this video, I have started the second book, so I'm probably gonna do a review of that one too. So yeah, just let me just wrap this up. First of all, thank you for going on this journey with me. So I rated the book 4 out of 5 stars. Obviously, huge recommend for me. I think it's a very solid starting point, also for new readers, because I am a new reader. I didn't know anything about Discworld, and I started with the first one. And so, like, yeah, if you're new to Discworld, if you haven't read it before, you can definitely start with the first book. Obviously, I don't have any other books to recommend to you yet, so but like I thought this is a very solid starting point. Also, like I was a little bit worried at the start of like because it's a book written in the 80s and like and like there is certainly some things that have like changed in our perception since the 1980s. So I was kind of like wondering if there was gonna be stuff that was gonna pop up, but it's surprisingly modern for an 80s book. First of all, I didn't really catch any references to 80s. I mean, this is kind of partly due to the book being set in like a completely different universe to ours that doesn't really work with our rules. There were some casual things I noticed. Like twice I noticed that there were women in the story who were very scantily clad, and I was kind of like, why do the female characters have to be the one who are scantily clad? Like this was never really mentioned, or I think it was mentioned once, but like it didn't pop out at me that it was mentioned for male characters too. But then once it definitely served a narrative purpose on one occasion. So okay, yeah, sure, the least you can do. And also, it's basically only said, oh, and there was a scantily clad woman. So it never felt like we were lingering on that fact. So it's kind of like it's almost the opposite of this like men writing women, where you linger on like a woman's body even if she is clothed. And so it felt very much the opposite of leering. Yeah. Um when I was rating the book on Goodreads, which is where I do try to track my reading, I read the kind of like I think one of the either the first or the second review that popped up made this comparison of reading Discworld is kind of like getting a too large bowl of ice cream and eating it too quickly. Your brain will hurt, but the sweetness will be worth it. And I have to say, hard agree. Yeah, it's you kind of like I said in the beginning, you're thrown in at the deep end and you have to learn to swim. You have to kind of like figure out the story for yourself. But Pratchett trusts you to do that, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, again, like 4 out of 5 stars. Obviously, huge recommend for me. Even if you're new to Discworld, even if you've never read anything from Terry Pratchett before, I think this is well worth your while. I had a lot of fun with it, and I am very excited for the sequel. Just kind of like spoiler alert, I'm 80 pages into the sequel as of recording this video, and I am still having a very good time. This is kind of like all I have for you. This is what I wanted to talk about. And do join me next time for the review of the second book of the series. Until then, this is me signing off. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.